This is a really scary trend that I've noticed that started in the last couple of years and I never noticed it before. Something very similar to this happened to me just a few weeks ago. Check out this audio.
Kennedy Tower, Delta 45 Heavy, is that Zach?
Delta 45 Heavy, Kennedy Tower, you're following a citation. There'll be a heavy Boeing 777 departure between you and that traffic. Caution wake turbulence. Wind 280 at 17, gust 21. Runway 31 left, cleared to land.
31 left, clear to land, Delta 45 Heavy.
Delta 45 Heavy, reduce to final approach speed.
Clear to final, Delta 45 Heavy.
Air India 102 Heavy, Kennedy Tower, runway 31 left, line up and wait. Traffic's on a 5-mile final.
Runway 31 left, line up and wait, Air India 102 Heavy.
I'm guessing with all of that, you should know where I'm going to go with this. So we have a Delta 767 here on a 5-mile final for runway 31 left. And at the end of all of that, they got told to slow down to the final approach speed.
Delta 45 Heavy, reduce to final approach speed.
What that means is that when we're coming in on an approach, we might be going, in this case, let's say 200 knots. And you're coming at 200 knots, but your landing speed is going to be 150 knots. Just making up numbers here. I don't fly the 767, but those might be the rough numbers that you're working with. When air traffic control says slow to your final approach speed or slow down to your slowest practical or some version of that, what they're trying to do is create some separation between you and the plane in front of you. And so you might be at 200 knots and then you know, okay, hey, we need to really slow this up. So then you'll slow down and let's say in this particular case, again, I don't know, but his ref speed for landing was going to be 150 knots. They'll slow it down to 150 knots so that way they can give the amount of space or the most amount of space possible for air traffic control. What's happening is a controller here is actually trying to give the space in order to allow this 777 to take off before this Delta 767 comes into land. The problem is that there are some variables when you're dealing with landing traffic and departing traffic and trying to squeeze those things in. You saw that video I talked about with FedEx and Southwest, and that happened in Austin. What you have is when you have landing traffic coming in behind each other, everybody knows, hey, you need to get off the runway pretty quickly, or air traffic control can tell you, hey, expedite off the runway, you have somebody on a 4-mile final, and pilots will try to help each other out by getting off the runway quickly. However, when you have landing traffic that's landing, you can't obviously line up the other guy to take off until the other plane is landed, so you have a little bit more juggling that you have to do. Watch what happens next.
Jet Share 869, do you have Mike Charlie? Jet Share 869, right Mike Charlie, no delay off please, and then taxi November and left Quebec.
Now when the controller's asking that, do you have Mike Charlie, he's trying to get that pilot to get off the runway as soon as possible. He's hoping that they were going to get off sooner, but that he's encouraging them in a way by subtly hinting, get off the runway by do you have Mike Charlie. That's the way that controllers will tend to do that. Now, all of this is happening here in JFK, which is a very dense and complicated airspace. And before we get more into this video, I just want to tell you that I have the utmost respect for these controllers because JFK, Newark, LaGuardia, that airspace is got a lot of traffic coming into it, and they're honestly some of the best controllers that I've dealt with anywhere in the world. So this is in no means to bash all of these controllers, and I've dealt with a lot of controllers all over the world. They are very fast and very efficient, but in this case, it doesn't really work out well, in my opinion. So the plane the controller wants to get off the runway is a Citation, which is a small business jet, and he's asking him to exit the runway here at Mike Charlie. Now this is a pretty long runway, but it's important to know that 31 left has a displaced threshold, which means this area is not allowed for pilots to land on it. And when I pulled it up on my chart, I can see here that to get off the runway at Mike Charlie is actually only 5,439 feet, which is a very reasonable distance for a plane to land in. That's not like he's rolling it out all the way to the end. And when you're flying in corporate, because I used to do that, a lot of times you want to make that landing and that rollout as smooth as possible. If you're flying other things, let's say freight, you don't really care how aggressive the braking is. If it's more efficient or better, you might have a higher brake setting. But when you're flying corporate and you have people that paid a lot of money, you'll usually want to roll it out. But 5,000, 5,500 feet, that's not an excessive rollout. That's plenty of time for a jet of this size to get off the runway quickly. 5,000 for me would be pretty tight, but for them, that's a reasonable amount of time. But what you have to keep in mind is all this is happening while Delta is barreling in on them and they're on a 5-mile final. Now, when I hear 5 miles, I think roughly 2 minutes because they're going to be doing roughly 3 miles a minute at 180 knots. So they're going to be there in about 2 minutes. So in order for this to all work out, this Air India plane has to get off the runway and be safely away from the runway before these Delta pilots come in and land. They can't be one lifting off and one touching down because something could go wrong, and most pilots aren't going to feel comfortable getting themselves pinned into that corner because the plane that's landing is going to have a lot more speed and momentum than the one that's just getting off the ground in some cases. You don't want to be a pilot in this situation where you're roughly 50 feet from the ground and all of a sudden you see the plane in front of you have an engine explode and now there's parts all over the runway and it's not going to be a safe place for you to land. Now you have to do a go around. They're in the air, maybe they're on fire, because what's going to happen is when you do a go around, your nose is going to go up and you're going to have a hard time seeing in front of you. So now you have your nose going up, you're very close to another plane that's going up in the air. It's just going to be an uncomfortable situation. So you don't want to be that close, and at the end of the day, you have to go with what you're comfortable with. That's the number one rule. If you're feeling in your gut, this doesn't feel right, or hey, I don't feel like this is going to be safe, then you as a pilot have to say, hey, no, this is no good. We got to get out of here. So watch what happens.
Air India 102 heavy, wind 270 at 17, runway 31 left, clear for takeoff, traffic 2.5 mile final.
Runway 31 left, clear for takeoff, Air India 102 heavy.
Check GR 869, left onto Quebec, monitor ground point niner.
You want Delta 45 to go around?
Delta 45 heavy, you said you're going around?
Hey, affirmative.
Delta 45 heavy, roger, go around. Turn left heading 220 and climb and maintain 2000.
Turn left heading 220, climb maintain 2000, Delta 45 heavy.
American 45 heavy, you have a reason for the missed approach?
Delta 45 heavy area, there's no way that was going to work with there, any in front of us there.
First, I want to talk about the difference of this situation and the one I talked about earlier that I did the video on with FedEx and Southwest that happened in Austin. That Austin video, it sounded like to me that Southwest got on the runway and they just took forever to get on the roll. I've talked about in the past, when you hear people start talking at a faster rate, usually they're moving at a faster rate. Sometimes that can be stress related. Sometimes it could be, hey, they're trying to move quickly. They know that Delta's right behind them. Air India knows that Delta is coming up to land and they want to get out of the way for them. That's just a courtesy that all pilots they're trying to be efficient with what they're doing. They want the efficiency from air traffic control. And so that guy's talking quickly, I think because he's trying to move quickly to get everything done and get off the runway. That's what I hear as I'm listening to the audio.
Runway 31 left, clear for takeoff, Air India 102 heavy.
Now here's the problem. This 777 is going to India. That's a long flight. And so a 777 that's full of jet fuel like that is going to need a lot of runway. Let's say 1.5 miles of runway. And they're at a dead stop. And then you have a plane behind them that is moving at, let's say, 3 miles a minute. Or maybe they've slowed down so it's 2.5 miles a minute. They are going to be there very quickly. And that Air India plane has to go from a dead stop because they can't get clear for takeoff until that citation gets off the runway. So they're going to need 1.5 miles roughly of runway. And then this other plane that's coming in, Delta, is going to be there in roughly a minute. That is a very tight thing to do. And this is all happening in the daytime. So what that allows is for the pilots that are in the Delta pilots, they can see the plane that's down there and they can see where they're at in the relation to their takeoff. Most pilots are going to know when they're coming in, like, hey, he's at the very beginning of the runway or he's at the very end of the runway. He's at the middle of the runway, wherever it's at, and they know kind of where that would put them as far as for their stage of takeoff. If they're towards the middle of the runway and you're still 100, 200 feet back, you know they're going to be off the runway before you get down there. But if they're at the middle of the runway and you're at 50 feet, you're thinking, oh, this is going to be very tight, and that can be a problem. So that's why this Delta crew decided it was too tight and it was time to do this go-around.
Delta 45 heavy area, there's no way that was going to work with there, any in front of us there.
Now my story was a little different. That happened a few weeks ago. Mine was at night, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these Delta pilots making the decision to do the go-around, I'm sure made a lot of the passengers nervous because they maybe have never experienced a go-around before. But this pilot that's flying for Delta sounds very cool, calm, collected, saying, hey, that wasn't going to work for us, so we decided to do a go-around. So if the passengers could hear how calm he was, they would probably relax a little bit, assuming that they didn't know there was another plane on the runway, but they would relax a little bit because he's just making what he thinks is the smartest, safest decision, which is 100% the right decision here. If he doesn't feel that it's safe, there's no reason to try to force it. There's nothing to prove. Unless he's running out of gas or he's on fire, there's no reason to get on the ground right away. So he made the decision to do that go-around. Now listen to the response from air traffic control to that.
Delta 45 Heavy. I do this every day, sir. It would have worked. It would have been tight, but it would have worked. You can contact New York on 128.12.
2812 and Delta 45 Heavy if we needed to go around.
Now, giving credit where credit is due, that pilot isn't being upset. He's not being rude. He's being a professional, which is what you're supposed to be if you're an airline pilot. He's not arguing and doing all that other stuff that you see little kids do when they get on the radio. He's just saying, hey, that was too tight. I wasn't comfortable with it, and it's my plane, it's my safety, and I chose to do a go-around. The controller saying, well, it would have been tight, but it would have worked. His opinion, I'm sorry, doesn't matter, because the pilots have to feel comfortable that they can safely get in there and land the aircraft. And because that controller saying, oh, it would have worked because I can see it would have worked, it being really, really tight and him feeling comfortable with it, in this case, doesn't matter because the pilot has to see this is going to work for me and my airplane and my safety and my crew. And you have to be able to justify in a court of law if something does go wrong, if Air India does blow the engine and aborts their takeoff or whatever, and now you're committed or who knows all the parameters. But if something happens and somebody dies or somebody gets hurt, those pilots in a court of law have to go and defend what they decided to do. So the controller clearing you to land doesn't mean that you have to do that, and he made the decision, I'm not comfortable with this, let's bug out and do this again. Now what I think happened is the controller thought the citation would probably be moving quicker and get off the runway quicker. He would have allowed Air India to get onto the runway quicker and out of the way. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And he could have slowed down Delta a lot earlier in the communication, but he decided to give all these other instructions before telling Delta to slow down.
Delta 45 Heavy, Kennedy Tower, you're following a citation. There'll be a heavy Boeing 777 departure between you and that traffic. Caution wake turbulence. Wind 280 at 17, gust 21, runway 31 left, cleared to land.
Now, if this had been a regional jet, let's say a CRJ 700 like I used to fly, it would have been a totally different scenario. As soon as that guy rolled off or we were in position, he could have said, hey, clear for takeoff. That little jet is going to need less time to spool up the engines and go. Our engines were smaller. They are able to spool up faster. It's a lighter plane. You can get off the ground quicker. All of those things can happen faster. On a 777, they're big, enormous engines, and those engines take a while to spool up. So even though they gives them the clearance, it takes a while. Even if you put the engines all the way up, it takes a while before they start motoring up and getting this plane moving, and this plane is going to need a lot more runway than, let's say, a CRJ. You can take that CRJ and fly it like a race car. A 777 is not going to fly like that. Now you can tell this controller is a bit irritated by the way he's saying that it would have fit.
I do this every day, sir. It would have worked. It would have been tight, but it would have worked.
But at the end of the day, it's a judgment call. And so this pilot made their call, air traffic control made their call of what they thought that was going to work, and the pilot said no. And this trend of trying to slide traffic in to make it all work, I've seen it happen a lot with landing traffic. That's really different because you can tell them, hey, you got somebody 4 miles behind you, please expedite off the runway, and it's a little bit easier to gauge speed. With the takeoff, that's something that I noticed more recently than before, where they're trying to fit stuff in where it's not going to work, and then this go-around happened. So here's my story that happened a few weeks ago that's very similar to this, but I was flying a Dash 8 at night, and we were coming in very heavy. And it had been a long night, but we were coming in and we hear air traffic control tell American to get up on the runway and that they had traffic on a 3-mile final. The problem is, at night, it's a lot harder to tell if the plane in front of you is moving because all you have is a few little lights and it's hard to tell where they're at in relation to the runway. Have they taken off? Are they in the air? It's a lot harder to tell everything. So as we continue our approach in, we're realizing like, oh man, we're coming in fast. That guy's on the runway. This is getting kind of tight, but we couldn't quite tell if they were off the ground or were they at the end of the runway or they in the air because we're still coming down towards the runway. By the time we started to realize like, oh, wow, we're all pinched up, basically like what was happening with this plane, it was a decision call. I was the one flying actually, and I just said, hey, we're just gonna land. They just got off the runway. And the reason why is that in my mind, it was gonna be safer because we were a very heavy, one. We were going a lot faster than that plane was going. So what would have happened is we would have overtaken them as they're climbing up, we're going up. They may be climbing up faster because they're a lot lighter than we are. It would have just been a higher risk situation. So I have to make this split-second call of like, okay, we're just going to land. And it was very uncomfortable and way more uncomfortable than it needed to be. It was like 1 in the morning. They could have waited 30 seconds, or they could have told us, hurry up, or they could have had him wait 1 more minute and take off after us, especially in the middle of the night. Now, the other side of that is you'll see sometimes when I go to let's say China. China will be holding short of the runway. There's not a plane in sight. They're like 15 miles from the runway, and we're like, hey, we're ready to go, and they're like landing traffic. And we can see on our radar screen, like, they are forever away. So we sit there for minutes, not seconds, minutes, as they come in and land. And we're thinking, dude, that was completely unnecessary. So you have two sides of it. You'll have some airports in the US where they just have so much experience, they feel comfortable filling in that gap for the takeoff and the landing, which in some cases I appreciate because there's 50 planes waiting. But at 1 in the morning, that was the only plane there, so it seemed like unreasonable. We were following another guy, so we thought that's who we were following, and then they decided they were going to slide somebody in. Well, they slid 2 people in, and they fit them out, and we're coming in at, I want to say like 170 knots. We were pretty heavy. So it's like we're going faster than normal, and they're trying to slide in another plane. And I think they went a little bit slow, even though the controller did tell them to hurry up because we were coming in. It was just not a good situation. So they're risking potentially us having to do a go around, like exactly like what Delta did, by trying to save them 1 or 2 minutes. It's going to cost us 15 or maybe 20 plus some reports, because then with the go around, we're saying, hey, you stacked this in too tight. Now that guy has to do a report and explain what happened. And we don't have to. As the pilots, it's our discretion. Our airline's not going to be upset with us if we're making a judgment call. In my situation, my judgment call was it's going to be safer to land than potentially overtake this guy with our weight and speed. So that was the decision that I made. This guy at the daytime had a much better gauge of the distance of what was going on. So they made the decision call to do the go around. So it creates an extra paperwork for air traffic control. So the moral of the story is, if you make me wait multiple minutes, I'm not happy. And if you make me wait 30 seconds, I'm also not happy. So basically, pilots are never happy unless we get exactly what we want every single time. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.